Pet Cemetery, 2054 83rd Street, Brooklyn, New York, 1971 to 1977. Teddy. My father loved a good steak. Eating steak in our house was a special occasion. So special that I can't ever remember having consumed a single bite during all the years I lived at 2054 83rd Street. But occasionally my father would treat himself. No one begrudged him. Or more accurately, no one was insane enough to begrudge him, at least vocally. And when he did treat himself, my father not only savored the eating, but also the process of meticulously preparing the meat. He would be in the kitchen, standing in front of the counter next to the stove, messing with the steak for no less than 30 minutes, poking at it with a fork, pounding the flesh on the chopping block, seasoning it just right, then finally leaving it to rest until it reached room temperature. The routine made him happy. Am I imagining that he would whistle while he worked? On one of those special steak days, I was in the good room, reclined on the yellow sofa, reading a book and listening to my father working and whistling away in the kitchen. The good room in our house was in distinct contrast to the unfortunate, less prestigious room right next to it, the living room, or bad room, as I came to think of it. The good room had nicer furniture and was meant for guests to congregate during special occasions, most especially the holidays. It is extraordinary to consider that in such a tiny house, 1,400 square feet for a family of seven, this room constituted approximately half the square footage of the ground floor, yet it was rarely occupied. Perhaps I was expressing an early and highly lame rebellious streak by insisting on sprawling out on the best couch in the house, in the good room, just to read Stephen King's Salem's Lot. My father finished his preparations. The steak had been sufficiently tenderized, poked, prodded, and seasoned. Now was its time to rest, along with my father, who took the opportunity to take a nap on the sorry, saggy, second rate orange sofa in the living room. But after all his prep work, it was plenty comfortable enough for my father, who fell asleep almost immediately, no doubt dreaming about the steak he would soon sizzle to perfection on the gas stove. A few months earlier, our family of seven had become eight after my parents, suddenly, unexpectedly, and with zero forethought or preparation, walked in the door with an unbearably cute beagle puppy we christened Teddy. To this day, I have no idea where they got him. Both my parents were normally cautious. My father, in particular, did not like change. And having a dog was not nearly as common as it is today, especially in the ethnic enclave where we lived in Bensonhurst. Did immigrant Italians not like dogs? I honestly can't remember another family with a pet. So this was a big deal, an almost revolutionary act in the Conley household on the part of my parents. We were all so excited that they were finally loosening up. And who could help but fall in love with this innocent little creature, with his big brown eyes and comically long ears drooping almost to the floor? But there were challenges from the outset. Teddy was blessed with more beauty than brains. And if there was such a thing as puppy training school in those days, Teddy had never enrolled. He would have to rely on my parents' canine experience, which was precisely nil. The first signs of trouble began with potty training. My parents decided that Teddy's designated area to do his business would be the small room behind the kitchen, which led to the backyard stairs. On Teddy's first day as a Conley, my father carefully laid out newspaper, covering every inch of the floor. Don't ask me why they even wanted Teddy to do his business in this tiny room, as opposed to the backyard, or the front yard, or during walks around the block. I don't even think we owned a leash. Maybe Teddy shared my rebellious streak, because not once during the ensuing months did he ever do his business on those newspapers. Not that he didn't poo and pee profusely in that room. In fact, he would poo and pee only in that room and never outside. The extraordinary thing, and maybe we didn't give him enough credit for his intellect, was his ability to create a sliver of floor uncovered by newspaper using his paws to move aside the sports section of the daily news, perhaps, to give himself just enough room to empty his bowels and bladder. Even more exceptional was the degree to which my parents were just as upset no matter how many times Teddy did this. Months after he had first padded through our front doors, Teddy still managed to shock and exasperate them at each transgression. While Teddy adapted to the orientation of the paper that my father, on his hands and knees, arranged so fastidiously, to the number of layers, and even to whether he deployed the ponderous New York Times Sunday edition or the slimmer daily New York Post, my parents never accepted that their strategy was to blame. Jesus Christ! My father muttered after he opened the back door to find Teddy sitting innocently next to a steaming brown pile, deposited strategically in a bespoke space he had created between the Times's thick magazine section and the Sunday comics. Newly sprayed, glistening yellow pee streaked down the white wall in the corner of the room. Not a drop moistened an inch of newspaper. "Can you believe this goddamn dog?" he asked, shaking his head. Without looking up, my mother sighed and shook her head absently as she drank her tea and read the newspaper at the kitchen table. I was starting to wonder whether my father was going to wake up soon. The steak must be as well rested as he was, when I heard the footsteps upstairs. Was my mother, one of my brothers, or sister going to descend from the gloom above? No. It was Teddy's distinctive shuffle. He must have roused his floppy eared self from wherever he had been hibernating. Maybe it was time to do his business in his downstairs bathroom. If so, his need must have been desperate. At the top of the stairs, his steps accelerated, and he raced down at alarming speed. It is amazing he didn't lose traction as he navigated the steps. I sat up in time to see him land at the bottom and take a sharp right-hand turn into the good room, his paws slipping on the hardwood floor like a cartoon character flailing to gain traction. He sprinted past me in a blur in the direction of the living room. At the threshold between the good and bad rooms, Teddy launched himself into the air. If he were competing in the canine Olympics as a long jumper, he would have left all the other dogs in the dust. His epic leap catapulted him the entire way across the living room, directly onto my sleeping father's chest. He landed hard with an audible thump. By the time my father's eyes opened, Teddy had already come and gone. As if the precise path had been pre-wired into his tiny brain, he had not paused a second, springing from my father's chest to the floor before skidding and sliding his way into the kitchen, where he leapt like a salmon cresting a waterfall, attaining supernatural heights as he snatched the perfectly prepared steak from the chopping block into his salivating snout. "Anne! Anne! I'm having a heart attack! Anne!" My father, wide-eyed with shock, yelled at the top of his lungs as he clutched desperately at his chest. My mother was upstairs, taking one of her daily 2-hour baths. Our house had only one bathroom, but this was my mother's sole oasis, her haven of peace and quiet. More than once, I had to pee in the basement's utility sink before we finally built a powder room behind the kitchen in the same spot where Teddy's bathroom had once been. My mother rushed down, dripping, and draped in a towel. My father's breath came in panicked gulps. He looked deathly pale. "Anne, call 911!" "It was Teddy," I blurted from the good room. "He jumped on Dad's chest." I felt immediately guilty for telling on the little man. My mother glanced into the kitchen. Teddy was gnawing noisily and wetly at the raw steak. Too big to lift, he snouted the mangled hunk of beef across the kitchen floor towards his special room. My father's expression turned immediately from shock to anger. Recovered from his cardiac event, he rose from the couch and peered into the kitchen, just in time to see Teddy hiding his steak in the back room, beneath yesterday's style section. It was at least 15 minutes before he gave up chasing Teddy all around the house, upstairs and downstairs, the good room, the bad room, the kitchen, back upstairs and downstairs, Teddy freakishly fast, his paws skidding, my father huffing and puffing and yelling, coming close, but never quite catching him. Frank, Frank, stop, you're going to hurt yourself, repeated my mother calmly, as she stood stoically in the middle of the living room while the lunacy swirled around her. This was not the first or last time that my father was convinced of his impending death or a severe disability. The previous year, my parents had initiated what became a treasured tradition of month-long family summer vacations in the Hamptons. The Hamptons sounds posh today, but for us, it meant a bare-bones, tiny cottage in Noyak, a 15-minute drive from Sag Harbor, and cheap enough for a cop to afford. Our cozy little place that first year was called Stay a While. On the very first night there, we all heard a scream coming from my parents' bedroom. Ann! Ann, I'm blind! I'm blind! Unfamiliar with country life, my father had woken up to discover he could perceive not a scintilla of light, no matter how wide he opened his eyes. He stumbled to the bathroom, his hands outstretched, groping in vain for a light switch. My mother did not even get up from the bed. Frank, it's just dark. We're 100 miles from the city. After things had returned to normal on that infamous steak night, I saw my father in the kitchen, staring down at the chopping block, inspecting his drool-covered, chewed-up steak, as if he were seriously considering salvaging it. My mother went back upstairs and resumed her bath. I continued reading Stephen King in the good room, and Teddy found a bare patch of floor to do his business. Spunky and Jake and Morris and Martha and Sam and Myrtle and the end of pets. More pets followed Teddy's trailblazing path through our front door. Spunky the cat joined the family via a trash can where my brother Frank had found her. She welcomed both my sister Catherine and me to the wonderful world of allergies. Sensing our affliction, Spunky seemed to pay special attention to the two of us. During her brief time with us, Spunky regularly ambushed Catherine from behind, clawing at her legs like a human scratching post, leaving angry gashes. And she would sleep only with me, lying on my crotch, her glowing green eyes staring straight up at mine. I started to have what I thought were nightmares of her clawing and gnawing at my privates. The final straw for Spunky came the night she enraged my normally unflappable mother, who pretty much flung her down the basement stairs after finding her nibbling at the lasagna cooling on the stove. I did not ask where Spunky had suddenly disappeared to when she failed to scratch at my door that night, or any thereafter. Our desire to avoid allergies led to the bird and reptile phase of the Conley menagerie, starting with Sam the parakeet. Perhaps he had a secret way of communicating household tips with Teddy, because Sam also soon learned to drive us crazy by defecating exactly where he was not supposed to, all over the living room every time he was released from his cage. Getting him back inside was a skill none of us ever mastered, so he'd often spend the night perched on the curtain rod in the dark, pooping to his heart's content. A tank in Catherine's room housed her lizards, Morris and Martha, along with Jake the snake, who regularly shed his skin, leaving behind a gross, dried-out husk. Myrtle the turtle resided in his plastic tub downstairs in the living room. When allowed to roam free, Myrtle shared my tendency to gravitate to the good room. He could always be found under the good room couch, way back in the farthest, darkest corner. If only Jake were as easy to find. One morning, Catherine announced he had disappeared. How in the world did you let him escape from a closed cage? I asked. I was playing with him. Then he was gone. I did not ask how you play with a snake. We turned our house upside down looking for him. No luck. Days went by with no signs of Jake. Speculation was rampant. Had he gotten outside? Slithered into a toilet? God forbid, found comfort in a bed? The mystery was solved early one morning, 10 days after the disappearance, announced by a high-pitched shriek, followed by a series of expletives emanating from my parents' bedroom. Oh, Jesus, God damn it, shit, goddamn gross, my father yelled, awakening and alarming the entire household. Even Danny and Frank, who by this time were sleeping in the basement, in the flimsy bedrooms my handyman father had constructed out of thin particle board to free up space so my sister could have her own room. Jake the snake had somehow found his way into a drawer of my father's dresser, where, seeking warmth, he had slithered into a wool sock. Little did Jake know that he was nestled next to the loaded gun my father was now allowed to have after finally getting his license restored by the police department following years on light duty. By the time my groggy father slipped his right foot into a sock that morning, Jake had become trapped and died, and over time had decomposed into a fetid goop. My mother collapsed on the bed, laughing hysterically. Not amused, cursing beneath his breath, my father huffed by us, hopping on one foot to the bathroom. He slammed the door and began to fill the tub. And thus ended the Conley pet era. It would take 20 years and children of my own before I ever shared a home with one again.